Okay, so welcome everyone to this IBM seminar. Today we host Alberto Privitera, who is currently in Chicago he's a Marie Curie Fellow at Northwestern University in the group of Mike Vasilevsky. So Alberto did his PhD in Padova, in Italy, in 2018 in material science and engineering, and then he moved for a postdoc. For a 3-year postdoc in Oxford, where he worked, as he was saying a minute ago, on solar cells and spin physics. And then he stayed briefly in Turin and then moved to Florence for a year and then probably became a Marie Curie Fellow, as I was saying before. And now he actually got a tenure track position in the Department of Florence, where he will join in the University of Florence, where we will join the Department of Industrial Engineering, and he will work in the LAM laboratory funded by Gatteschi and Roberta Sessoli. So today is going to talk about light-driven pathways in molecular spin qubits, a really exciting topic in today's scientific world, I'd say. All right, Alberto, take it from here.
Okay, thank you very much for the nice introduction and thanks for the invitation. I really like this series of seminars where we are exchanging our works among the EPR community. So as you said, the topic of today is going to be light-driven pathways in molecular spin qubits. And in this introductory slide, like in the first slide, you see my name, but actually before starting, I would like to acknowledge all the people that are involved in this project. And in particular, I would like to start acknowledging the two groups where I'm carrying out this research, the Laboratory of Molecular Magnetism in Florence. As you can imagine from this picture, I'm very jealous every time that I receive pictures from them because they are in the beautiful Italy enjoying the nice weather and I'm in Chicago in the cold, but soon I will join them. And on top of this, I would obviously like to thank the Vasilevsky Group and Northwestern University, where I carried out most of the experimental work on the molecules and on the materials that I'm showing you today. Specifically, there are several people that I would like to thank, both the University of Florence and Northwestern University, and also we are collaborating with the Trinity College in Dublin, in particular with the group of Professor Senge for the synthesis of porphyrins, and with the group of Stefano Carretta in Parma for theoretical modeling of our qubit systems. So I said I'm going to talk about molecular qubits, so I would like to quickly give you an introduction on the field of quantum information science. So quantum information science leverages the fundamental properties of the matter, the quantum properties of the matter, for example, entanglement and superposition, to encode and manipulate information. There are several applications of quantum information science. We are all familiar with quantum computing, for example, the new quantum computers that are proposed by Google or Microsoft, but there are also, on top of quantum computing, several other very interesting fields, for example, quantum communication that can ensure ultra-secure communication between a sender and a receiver, and quantum sensing that takes advantage of the exquisite coherent properties of the matter in order to be able to detect very tiny magnetic fields, electric fields, and other tiny interactions. At the core of quantum information science, we have the concept of the quantum bit. The quantum bit or qubit is the analogous of the classical bit, but differently from a classical bit that can exist only in two states that are 0 and 1, a qubit can exist in a superposition of these states, and therefore it is usually represented with a Bloch sphere. There are several physical implementation of qubits. For example, the superconducting circuits, the quantum dots, the color centers. And as you can imagine, every time that there are so many technologies and so many alternatives, it means that most probably none of these alternatives is working really well. And in general, I would say that these top-down qubit technologies, even though so far are the most advanced technologies in the quantum field, they suffer from two main issues. The first is the lack of atomic control and scalability. Because, as you can imagine, from a fabrication point of view, it's very difficult to be able to control the displacement of the atoms, for example, in a surface, and to be able to control the interqubit interactions with atomic scale precision. The second problem that is shared by several of these technologies, and maybe the only technology that doesn't have this problem is the color centers, is the need for sub-Kelvin temperatures. Sub-Kelvin temperatures are needed for different reasons. First of all, they are needed for maintaining the coherence times, to have long enough coherent times in order to carry out quantum operations. They are needed sometimes for initialization, which means every time that you are operating with qubits, you need to be sure that the starting point of the qubit is a well-defined state, and most of the times you need sub-Kelvin temperatures to achieve this. And the third point is that some of these technologies relies, for example, on superconducting materials, and in order to have superconducting behavior, you need to go to very low temperatures. Another alternative to all these technologies are molecules. Molecules are ideal because they are inherent quantum systems with discrete energy levels, so they are the ideal systems for quantum technologies. And in particular, molecular qubits can take advantage of their electron and nuclear spins to store and process information. So most of the times when we work with molecules, we are looking at the spin properties of the molecules. The real advantage of molecules with respect to all the top-down approaches that I showed you before is that they can be synthesized in large quantities with atomic precision and high reproducibility. So the fabrication problem is not a problem anymore, because with the molecular synthesis, you can place the atoms within the molecular structure and the molecular architecture. Among the several molecules that have been proposed in recent years for quantum applications, in the laboratory of molecular magnetism, we started to work with porphyrins, and in particular with metalloporphyrins. So why we selected metalloporphyrins? There are different reasons. The first is that they possess good coherence times, and in particular, for example, vanadil porphyrins has shown acceptable coherence times even at room temperature. On top of this, working with transition metals give you a really high spin tunability, because you can control the anisotropic interactions through and also you can work with different metals in order to tune at best the spin system. On top of this, the porphyrin scaffold possesses unique electric and optical properties, which is important if you want to use light, as I will show you today. And finally, porphyrins are also interesting because they can be processed and deposited into surfaces, and most importantly, the porphyrin scaffold kind of protect the coherence properties of the metal, and therefore, even when they are deposited in solid state, the coherence properties of these porphyrins are still maintained in a certain extent. Even though there are all these advantages, we are facing with molecular qubits three main challenges. And this is because the field is still at the beginning. We recently started working with molecular qubits with respect to other more mature technologies. And the main three challenges that we are facing at the moment are scalability, spin initialization, and readout. So there are two different kinds of scalability. So let's quickly discuss scalability. The first kind of scalability is the vertical scalability. Most of the times, qubits have two energy levels, the 0 and the 1. But you can imagine that the more energy levels we have, the better it is, because you can implement more advanced quantum operations. So this is the vertical scalability, and therefore having molecules with several energy levels, it is better. But the real problem of scalability in the field of molecular qubits is the horizontal scalability. That means having different qubits that are individually addressable, and being able to turn on the interaction between molecular qubits on command. This is something that it has not been shown, let's say, demonstrated, but we are working towards this direction. The second problem of molecular qubits is that, as you can imagine, since we are working with spins, the energy levels between electron and nuclear spins is very low. So in order to have spin initialization, that means being able to start from a well-defined state, we need to go to sub-Kelvin temperatures, because at room temperature, all the energy levels of these molecular qubits are basically almost equally populated, and therefore you don't have a well-defined initial level. And finally, readout. Most of the times, these molecular qubits are read through microwaves, so through EPR techniques. EPR technique and microwave detection is very nice, but suffer from sensitivity problems. So, for example, if we want to do single molecule operation, it's going to be a little bit difficult, and there are other alternatives nowadays that are being proposed, for example, optical readout or electrical readout. So from a readout point of view, let's say that we are doing some steps forward. So the topic of today is how light and how light-induced processes can help us to address all these grand challenges. And in particular, today I would like to focus on scalability and spin initialization. I decided to divide the presentation in three parts, and I will answer three specific questions. Let's see if I will be able to answer all the three questions if I have enough time, because I tend to speak a lot. So the first question that I would like to answer is, can we generate spin-polarized multi-level molecular qubits? And so this is the realm of vertical scalability. So can we generate molecular qubits with more than two energy levels using light? And on top of this, can we take advantage of spin polarization in order to have pseudo-pure states? In order to address this question, we took inspiration from the field of the qubit chromophore architecture. In particular, here I'm proposing a free-base porphyrin as a chromophore and the vanadil porphyrin as a molecular qubit. The vanadil has a spin 1/2 and nuclear spin 7/2 that is coupled through hyperfine interaction. So in the ground state, this system has a doublet spin state. But if we photoexcite the chromophore, so if we photoexcite the free-base porphyrin, we are generating an excited singlet state in the chromophore that can undergo enhanced intersystem crossing due to the presence of the doublet spin state. And this enhanced intersystem crossing generates a triplet state on the chromophore. And this triplet state can couple with a doublet state, generating therefore either a quartet or a doublet excited state. The quartet is lower in energy, and this has been observed with this kind of porphyrins. So if you think about the population of this quartet state, this can be considered a multi-level qubit, because instead of having two energy levels, we have four energy levels that then are coupled through hyperfine interactions with the spin 7.5. On top of this, when this system decays to the ground state, because of spin selective pathways, you can generate spin polarization in the ground state, and this spin polarization can be seen as a source of a spin initialization of our molecular qubit. So in this kind of architecture, the spin photophysics can be very rich. So the molecules that we decided to study are this dimer, this free-base porphyrin vanadil dimer, and we decided to study also the two model system, the monomer, the vanadil monomer, and the free-base monomer. If we look at the optical properties, we can see that they are quite interesting, because there is a transition at 640 that is shared both by the free-base porphyrin and the dimer, while this transition is not present in the vanadil porphyrin. This means that if we photoexcite at 640 nanometers, we have a selective photoexcitation of the free-base porphyrin scaffold, which is very good for selectivity. So we carried out transient absorption in this molecule, exciting at 640 in the dimer, and from the transient absorption, what we observed is the confirmation of the photophysical landscape that I showed you before. In particular, you have the generation of a singlet state in the free-base porphyrin. Then in 7.7 picoseconds, there is intersystem crossing. This is much faster than normal porphyrins, normal free-base porphyrins, where the intersystem crossing occurs in the time scales of nanoseconds. So you have 3 orders of magnitudes faster due to the presence of the spin on the vanadil. And then you generate this coupled state, this triplet in the free-base porphyrin that is coupled to the doublet, that decays in 46 microseconds. Again, the lifetime of this state is much faster than in normal free-base porphyrins. So transient absorption is a very nice technique, because it allows us to see and to study the photophysics with hundreds of femtoseconds of time resolution, but it cannot tell us anything about the spin of this photoexcited state. So we are not able to differentiate between a doublet or a quartet state, because we just see the feature of a triplet in the free-base porphyrin. Before showing you the results of EPR that will in some way answer our interest in the spin system, I would like to compare the photophysics, the transient absorption photophysics of the vanadil dimer with the vanadil monomer. In the vanadil monomer, you can see that the intersystem crossing is even faster, is lower than 1 picoseconds, and this is due to the fact that the triplet is in the same porphyry scaffold that is hosting the vanadil, so there is a very strong interaction, so the intersystem crossing is very quick, and the decay is even faster. While in the vanadil free-base porphyrin dimer, all the processes are slowed down, and if you look at the decay time of the triplet, is 46 microseconds, which is in line with the time resolution of time-resolved EPR. So this suggests us that we are able to carry out time-resolved EPR in these systems. So for those of you who are not familiar with time-resolved EPR technique, I decided to quickly go towards the first principles of EPR. So time-resolved EPR is similar to continuous wave EPR, with the difference that we have a pulsed laser that through an optical parametric oscillator can tune the wavelength, the excitation wavelength, and this laser is focused towards the cavity where there is our sample, and for each magnetic field position we are acquiring an EPR transient right after the laser pulse. If we do this for each magnetic field position, we end up with a bidimensional, three-dimensional surface where you have time on one axis, magnetic field on another axis, and on the third axis, here is represented as a counterplot, you have the intensity. As you can see, the intensity can be either positive and negative. This is different from standard continuous wave EPR, where you have a first derivative shape of your EPR spectrum. In this case, we have a direct detection. So every time that you have a positive and emissive, it means that the system is out of thermal equilibrium, so you have real absorption and emission. And this is related to the fact that every time that you are studying photoexcited spin states, you are out of Boltzmann equilibrium, and therefore you have the so-called spin polarizations, which means that the spin sublevels of your spin state are not populated through Boltzmann equilibrium, but they are non-Boltzmann sublevels. And this is very interesting because from the spin polarization, you can, for example, infer the previous steps occurred before, for example, an electron transfer, if you are studying electron transfer, or you can study the intersystem crossing mechanism if, like in our case, you are studying intersystem crossing. Okay, the first sample, the first species that we studied with time-resolved EPR is the vanadil monomer. The time-resolved EPR spectrum of the vanadil monomer is similar to the one reported by Kandrashkin, Asano, and Van der Est in 2006, and it's an absorptive signal that is generated after photoexcitation and that has been attributed to a photoexcited, photogenerated quartet state. As you can see, it's good that we are observing this signal, but this signal has a sort of panettone shape. So you are not able to observe the hyperfine structure of this signal because of two reasons. The first is that it's a little bit noisy because the excited state is not lasting enough, and also because the hyperfine interaction is basically like the line shape is and the line width is covering the hyperfine interaction, let's say. An interesting result, however, is observed when we carry out the same experiment in the vanadil dimer. In this case, you can see that there are two main differences. The first is that the signal is in emission instead of being in absorption. And on top of this, we are observing a very nice hyperfine structure. If you look at the field difference between these peaks, you can see that on average is 5 millitesla, that is 140 megahertz, that is 1/3 of the Z component of the hyperfine tensor of the vanadil. This fact suggests that what we are observing is a photoexcited state, and in particular it can be either a quartet or a doublet state. On top of this, something that is very interesting is that we carried out the same measurements at room temperature, and what we observed is that still, at room temperature, we are observing a spin polarized signal with a clear hyperfine structure. In this case, the hyperfine structure is even more resolved because we have the molecular tumbling that is averaging the hyperfine anisotropies. And on top of this, at room temperature, what we are observing is that the signal starts in emission and then it goes in absorption. And this is related to the fact that at room temperature, the T1 is much faster, and therefore you have a rapid spin relaxation, population relaxation of your quartet state. In order to get more information about our spin system, because so far the hyperfine splitting is suggesting us that is a quartet state, but in order to be sure, 100% sure, we need to carry out the spectral simulations. So we decided to do time-resolved EPR in 5CB, and in 5CB, so in this solvent, in liquid crystal, we are able to orient our molecules. In particular, in the parallel orientation, the so-called parallel orientation, we are probing the Y axis of this molecular structure because the porphyrin rings are orienting parallel with the 5CB, that is this molecule. While if we rotate the sample, and so we are probing the perpendicular direction, we are probing the X and Z plane of the vanadil porphyrin. If you look at the hyperfine tensor of the vanadil, you can see that the Z interaction is the direction where the hyperfine interaction is larger, and therefore when we are probing this perpendicular direction, the splitting, the hyperfine splitting, is much clearer than in the parallel direction. So we carried out the spectral simulations of these spectra obtained in liquid crystals. Unfortunately, we don't have too much time to go into the details. If you are interested, we can discuss them later. But what I would like to highlight is that from the spectral simulations, what we observed is that, first of all the parameters of the simulations were fixed, apart from the energy levels of the populations of the energy levels of the spin levels. So you can see from the best fit spectral simulation, you can see that the simulations are quite good in agreement, are quite in agreement with the experimental spectra, but they are not perfect because the relative intensity of, for example, of these lines is not perfect. In order to achieve a perfect match between the experimental and the theoretical results, we have to take into account not only electron spin polarization, but also nuclear spin polarization. This means that basically, or these results suggest that through these spin polarization pathways and these photophysical pathways, what we are generating is not only a non-Boltzmann equilibrium in the electron spin sublevels, but it's also a non-Boltzmann equilibrium in the nuclear spin sublevels. If we want to look at these results more into detail, we can see at the energy level diagram for this dimer, and in particular, if we magnified, for example, this energy level, you can see that at 85 Kelvin, if we were in presence of Boltzmann populations, all the nuclear levels should be equally populated. But what our simulations are suggesting us is that there is a strong non-Boltzmann populations, in particular of 3 orders of magnitude enhanced in the nuclear sublevels. And this is, in my opinion, an interesting result because can have impact not only in the field of quantum information science, but also, for example, in the field of NMR. And if you are interested, we can discuss this later. Okay, so the second question that I would like to address is how can we enable control communication between molecular qubits on command. So before in the first chapter, let's say, we saw that through light we can generate a photoexcited quartet state, and therefore we can address the problem of vertical scalability. Now I would like to address the problem of horizontal scalability, in the sense that we have 2 qubits that are not interacting, and the answer that I would like to address is, can we turn on the interactions between these 2 molecular qubits on command, taking advantage of light-induced processes? So in order to address this question, we decided to make a step forward in the molecular architecture, and we decided to add another molecular qubit on the dimer, and therefore we ended up with this trimer. If we look at the photophysics that we are expecting in this case, is that in the ground state you have 2 qubits that are not interacting because the interactions is disrupted by the singlet state in the chromophore. We are exciting the chromophore, and then you have enhanced intersystem crossing. You are generating a triplet state in the chromophore, and this triplet state is turning on the interaction between the qubits. And later we will go through this spin energy level diagram. Again, similar to before, after some time, this triplet state decays to the ground state, and you end up in the case where the 2 qubits are not interacting. Also in this case, the molecules were synthesized by Fabio Sant'Anni and Davide Ranieri. This is the trimer that they synthesized. And if we look at the EPR spectrum, the EPR spectrum can be simulated with the same simulation parameters of the vanadil monomer. This suggests that the two monomers, the two vanadil qubits, are not interacting in the ground state, at least for the spectral resolution of EPR spectroscopy. On top of this, if we do the UV visible absorption, what we can observe is that the UV visible spectrum is similar to the one of the dimer. In particular, you have the splitting of the Soré band due to the excitonic coupling of within this trimer, and then you always have four bands for transitions in the Q band region. In this case, as you can see, the Q band is very, very low in intensity, the Q band at 650 nanometer. So what we decided to do is to photoexcite our system at 550 nanometers, and this is what the transient absorption results suggest us. What we observed exciting at 550 nanometers is the same photophysical pathway that we observed in the dimer. The only difference is that if you excite at 550, most probably you're not only exciting the chromophore, but you're also exciting the monomer. Previous literature results plus our transient absorption analysis suggested that even if you are exciting the metalloporphyrins, there is an ultra-fast energy transfer that is even faster than the time scales of our transient absorption spectrometer, and therefore at time zero, at least for our spectrometer, what you are observing is that you start from a free base porphyrin, an excited single state in the free base porphyrin. So basically the photophysical panorama and landscape that I showed you before is confirmed. Again, the intersystem crossing here is much faster with respect to before. You have 0.65, and the excited state decays in 20 microseconds. I told you that transient absorption cannot tell us anything about the spin state of our molecule. And therefore, we decided to use and to carry out the time-resolved EPR spectroscopy. Before discussing the EPR results, I would like to quickly show you what we are expecting when you are coupling two spin 1/2 with a triplet state. So I told you that in the ground state, these spins are not independent, so they are not interacting. But when you are generating a triplet state, you are turning on the interaction. And in this case, you can have different energy levels. In particular, you can have either a quintet state, you can have two triplet states where the spins are coupled in this way, and then you can have a singlet state. From DFT calculations, we observed that the coupling in this trimer is a ferromagnetic coupling, so the quintet state is at lower energy with respect to the other states, and this is the spin energy level that we are expecting in this case. Also, in this case, we decided to carry out EPR spectra in 5 CB at low temperature in order to have a better description of the different orientations. But as you can see, unfortunately, even though the signal is present, is in emission, and is reminiscent of what we were observing in the dimer, unfortunately, in this case, the hyperfine structure is not so clear as before, and this is due to the fact that we are working with a lot of different energy levels, because we have two spins 1/2 that are coupled to a triplet, and each spin 1/2 has a nuclear spin 7/2. So all the energy levels are within this emissive signal. However, since we've done the measurements in 5 CB, already this spectra can tell us what we are observing. Because if you carry out the best fit spectral simulations, you can see that okay, the singlet state is not giving any results because it's diamagnetic. So in the singlet state, it cannot be a singlet state. The two triplet states are not able to fit our spectra in both the direction. So it means that we are not observing a triplet state. But if we carry out the measurements and the simulations with the quintet state, you can see that you have a good match in both orientations. So the spectral simulations are suggesting that what we are observing is a quintet state, which is in line with what we were expecting, because the quintet state is at lower energies, and it is also similar to what we were observing in the dimer. We decided to do a further step and to carry out the spectra at room temperature. And again, at room temperature, we are still observing the photoexcited quintet state. And we carried out like the study at different temperatures from 85 Kelvin to room temperature, and you can see that there is like a peculiar change in the polarization pattern. In particular, at the 85 Kelvin, the emissive part lives longer because of the T1 is longer, and then at a higher temperature, in particular when the toluene starts to melt, then the T1 is very, very low, and the signal basically is almost all absorptive, but always it goes through an emissive part. So let's say that at 85 Kelvin and at room temperature, the photophysics and the time evolution of the spin polarization is very similar, with the only difference that the T1 at 85 Kelvin is longer. Okay, so I don't know whether I have time to discuss the very final part. I will try to go very, very quickly because I think I have 5 minutes. The final question that I would like to answer is how can we achieve qubit initialization at higher temperatures? From this point of view, there are two alternatives. The first alternative is to use the same architecture that I showed you before, for example, the one of the dimer. In this case, when the quartet state decays to the ground state, you can have a spin initialization of the ground state. However, in order to have a spin initialization of the ground state, you need to have that the excited state lifetime lives much shorter than the spin lattice relaxation time of the ground state. And in this case, in our systems, this is not true, because you can see that the triplet decay lifetime is 40 microseconds, while at room temperature, the T1 of the ground state is around 1 microsecond. So it means that we need to do further molecular engineering in order to address this problem in these dimers. And in particular, there are different things that you can change. For example, the transition metal, you can try different bridges, you can probe different qubit chromophore orientations, or you can also try different chromophores. And these are things that we are exploring at the moment and understand how the molecular parameters can affect these spin photophysical pathways. Another alternative, and I'm gonna only mention this because unfortunately we don't have time, is the use of chirality-induced spin selectivity effect. This is a topic that has been explored in the ERC Synergy Project Castle, that is led by Roberta Sessoli, Mike Wasiliewski, Robert Bittel, and Stefano Carretta. In this case, what we are trying to do is to take advantage of the spin selectivity of the electron transfer, especially when this electron transfer occurs through chiral molecules, in order to create a spin polarization that can be transferred to a molecular qubits. Long story short, when you have a donor-acceptor dyad, for example, a donor-acceptor molecule, in the most simple case, if you are photoexciting the donor, you generate an excited singlet state that can undergo electron transfer. This electron transfer generates a charge transfer state that can be either a singlet or a triplet state, but if we want to be even more sophisticated, since the J interaction is very low, what you have is the radical pair scheme. That is, basically you have 4 energy levels, and in particular you have 2 energy levels that have a singlet and triplet character, and 2 energy levels that are pure triplet. triplet. So in standard electron transfer theory, once you have an electron transfer starting from an excited singlet state, you are populating mostly these two levels because they are the two levels that possess a singlet character. The chirality can affect this spin selectivity of the electron transfer process, and the idea of the project Castle is to take advantage of the spin polarization of this process through chiral molecules in order to polarize a qubit. So you transfer the polarization basically from this donor-acceptor dyad to a qubit. All of this, the study of the effect of chirality on the electron transfer process has been theoretized a few years ago by different groups independently, for example, the group in Parma, and then it was demonstrated for the first time experimentally in 2023 in the group of Mike Wasilewski. What we are trying to do now is to try to understand a little bit better and to have more insight into this electron transfer process through chiral molecules, and in particular, while so far all the studies were done on donor-acceptor dyads that are connected by a chiral bridge. So in this case, we were studying the effect of chirality when the electrons moves through a chiral bridge. The next step that we are trying to do is to see how chirality affect the electron transfer when it's the donor itself that is chiral. In this way, we can understand which step of the electron transfer is affected by chirality, and we can have even further insight about chirality. And in order to do this, or better, Giulia Agnoloni synthesized this molecular system that is characterized by a thiohelicin as a chiral donor and a PDI as an acceptor. So this is the donor and this is the acceptor. And she synthesized the entire series with different bridges in order to tune the lifetime of the charge transfer state. Unfortunately, we ran out of time and I don't have much time to discuss all the results, but I would just like to show you these final slides where, again, we carried out a time-resolved EPR in 5CB in the chiral dyad, and we observed a spectrum, the signal of a spin-correlated radical pair. If we do the same with an achiral dyad, what we observed is that the spectra are different. So these results, we still need to carry out the spectral simulations, and this is going to be the final step of this story. But this result suggests that there are differences between the presence and the absence of the chirality. In this case, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to investigate the effect of cis because, as you can see, the donor is different. So the G value, the G tensor of the donor is different. So we need to, in some way, carry out the spectral simulations, trying to fix as many parameters as we can. But this first result is suggesting that probably cis effect occurs also when the electrons, when the chirality is in the donor and not only in the bridge. So with this presentation, I hope that I managed to convince you that light in quantum information science and in molecular qubits can be very interesting. And in particular, the first results, the first chapter has demonstrated that through light, it is possible to generate spin polarized multi-level molecular qubits with spin polarization, not only in the electron spin energy level, but also in the nuclear spin levels. Through light, it is possible to turn on interactions between independent molecular qubits. And finally, there are different ways in order to promote qubit initialization through light, and maybe the most promising is the use of chirality, and we are trying to understand a little bit better how chirality affects the electron transfer process. So with this, I would like to thank again all the collaborators, and among all, I would like to thank you very much for your kind attention.
All right, thank you, Alberto, for this exciting seminar. So now we have a Q&A session. So whoever in the audience wants to ask a question, I encourage them to unmute themselves and just ask directly a question to Alberto. So while people are thinking about questions, I have a couple that are very well, the first one is very general. So the spectra that you show are well, from my point of view, are a bit noisy. So my question is, how long are these measurements, and are the samples actually stable? How long the samples are stable? If you can
Okay.
comment a little bit.
So the problem of noisy, so I would say at low temperatures the spectra are fine, I would say. At room temperature the spectra are noisy for different reasons. The first is that every time that you are studying photoexcited states, especially photoexcited states that don't live too long and whose spin polarization is not living too long, you always have to face problems with signal to noise ratio. The measurements, especially at room temperature, they last quite long because you need to average several times. They can last even 2-3 hours if you don't want to send an overnight measurement. And the second problem that in principle is not a problem, but sometimes, as you can see in this spectrum, it can be a problem, is that time-resolved EPR, differently from CW EPR, doesn't use the lock-in detection. So while CW EPR, you manage to obtain high sensitivity because you have the lock-in that in some way clean the spectrum by the unwanted noise. In this case, what we are doing is direct detection. So we don't have the lock-in because the lock-in would reduce the time resolution. So in this case, we need the time resolution. So since we are not going to use the lock-in, we need to rely on the spin polarization. And in particular, the signal, the fact that we are able to detect a signal is due only to the fact that the populations between the spin sublevels is out of the Boltzmann equilibrium. And therefore, as you can imagine, since T1 is very important in this sense, if T1 is too short, like at room temperature in this trimer, then the signals become very noisy.
Thank you. And I don't see any raised hand. So I have another question. Oh, yeah, we have one from Murugesan. So you can unmute and
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Alberto, it's a great talk.
Thanks.
I really enjoyed, okay? So my question is, I mean, you did most of the experiments in the solvent toluene. So if you change the solvent to acetonitrile or some other solvents, do you expect any kind of changes in the energy levels or the relaxation time that can help us to understand a little bit further?
Okay, this is an interesting question. I would say, for example, in the spin-correlated radical pairs, when you have an electron transfer, playing with the polarity of the solvent can have a strong impact, for example, on the lifetime of the charge transfer state and also on the on the efficiency of the electron transfer. In the case of these systems where we are working with intersystem crossing, I'm not expecting big changes with the change of the solvent. There might be some changes, but I'm not expecting strong differences. And for example, in this case, we used not only toluene, but also 5CB or 2-methyl-THF. We try to use, for example, 2-methyl-THF because it remains transparent at low temperatures. And we didn't observe big differences. I think, however, that it might be interesting to find to disperse these molecules in a medium that in some way hinder molecular tumbling at room temperature, because in that case we would be able to have longer T1, for example, and therefore we will be able to obtain better spectra even at room temperature. And I'm thinking, for example, about dispersing these molecules in a transparent polymer and trying to carry out measurements at room temperature in better conditions.
Yeah. In that case, what about glycerol? Glycerol restrict the rotation of the molecule.
Yeah, that can be a good idea. We didn't try glycerol, but it can be an alternative. It can be definitely an alternative to try.
Yeah, Thomas, if you have some time, can I ask another question? Or if somebody wants to ask,
Yes.
let them.
I don't see any other raised hands at the moment, so you can ask another question for sure.
Oh, okay. So thank you. Instead of vanadium, if we go for copper I is equal to 3/2. So in that case, the energy level kind of like, numbers will reduce. So
Yes.
that, what do you think?
Yeah, this is actually an interesting alternative that we are investigating as well. We have preliminary results on a dimer with the copper, and then obviously the next step will be to go to the trimer. The problem with copper is that on top of the hyperfine interaction with the copper, you also have the super hyperfine interaction with the nitrogens. In this case, the paramagnetic orbitals of the vanadil is, let's say, perpendicular to the nitrogens, so it's pointing in this direction, let's say, so you don't see any super hyperfine interaction. While with the copper, you will have a further splitting with the nitrogen, and therefore the signal, let's say, becomes even more complicated. But anyway, since I agree with you that copper is very interesting because it's a sort of brother of the vanadil, since it's still a spin 1/2, we are carrying out and we are performing similar works on also with the copper, and I can already tell you that at least in the dimer, what we are observing is something similar to the vanadil. In particular, we are observing a photoexcited quartet state, but this time with a completely different spin Hamiltonian, that is the spin Hamiltonian of the copper. It will be interesting, and I agree with you, it's interesting to play with the transition metals to see how they affect not only the spin photophysics, but also, for example, to see whether the excited state when you have the copper is going to last longer or shorter, to see whether we will be able in the future to spin polarize the ground state, which is the interesting part, let's say.
Yes, great. So the follow-up question is, if, as you said, yes, there is with the copper, you see the super Kuiper from the nitrogen. Yes, I understand. Okay. But then in that case, we can go for some kind of, thioporphyrin. We can replace the nitrogen with the sulfur or carbon.
Okay.
People publish a lot of work on thioporphyrin by replacing the nitrogen with the sulfur. Then they replace nitrogen with the carbon. So with that kind of porphyrins, okay, then we can avoid the super hyperfine or hypermin further splitting.
That's a good idea. Like, unfortunately, I'm not a chemist, so I cannot do the molecules myself. But it's absolutely an interesting idea, and I'm more than happy to collaborate, or if you have ideas, or if you can synthesize the molecules.
Yes, then one more question.
We can,
Thomas, yeah. I'm taking too much of time, okay?
No problem. Go ahead.
We can also, if you want, we can also have a separate discussion privately. I'm more than happy to discuss, but please go ahead.
Just one more question, okay? So can we replace this vanadial porphyrin with some organic radicals?
Yes, this is something that has been explored, for example, in the group of Mike Wasilewski, or also Sabine Richert is doing a lot of work with radicals. Radicals are amazing alternatives because they are simpler systems, so they are, let's say, the spin Hamiltonian is much simpler, and so they are a little bit easier to easier to understand what's going on with them. So I absolutely think that they are very good model systems that are alternative to metalloporphyrins or to transition metals, and there is a long established literature in the field of radical qubits, let's say, and if you're interested, I'm happy to share it with you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, we have a question from Sebastian now. Can go ahead.
Hi, thanks, and thanks for a really interesting talk. I think you showed the slide just depicting the different populations of the nuclear states that can generate. Yes, this one. And
Okay.
then did you say also that the electron states are also have these different non-equilibrium populations?
Yes. So in this system, what we observed is not only the electron spin states have different populations, but also the nuclear spin states. This is a preliminary result, so it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. And this diagram that I'm showing you is the diagram that we can infer from the spectral simulations. At the moment, we are carrying out further work because it's a little bit difficult to understand why and the real mechanism behind this nuclear spin polarization. It can be related to the fact that in these systems the hyperfine coupling is rather strong, so in some way it's mixing the level in such a way that when you have intersystem crossing and then the decay from the doublet to the quartet, you are having these strange spin effects. So what we are trying to do at the moment is to first carrying out multi-frequency EPR spectroscopy so that we will be able to see how different magnetic fields have impact on this population. And second, in Parma, they are developing a new technique that is time-resolved NMR spectroscopy, where we will have a direct detection on the NMR energy levels. And therefore, because in this case, I would say that what I'm showing you is an indirect way to probe the energy levels and the populations of the nuclei spins. But with time-resolved NMR, we will have a direct investigation of the populations of the nuclear energy levels.
Okay, very cool. I ask because I wonder if these are done, I think you said at X-band. All right, it says X-band.
Yes.
Have you considered other fields, say lower fields, if you can get this non-thermal population differences, if you can go to different fields or extremely low fields and try these measurements?
Yeah, that's absolutely interesting. I was considering only higher fields because, for example, in our lab we have Q band and W band. But going to lower fields is absolutely a very interesting approach. So something to take into account for the future.
Right. I mean, I guess I point that out because you can do other, say if you can do, say, strong drive type of measurements where now your electromagnetic radiation amplitude is on the order of say your static magnetic field, then you can also get some interesting, say, multiphoton or strong drive type of measurements from that.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the suggestion. And again, I'm happy to collaborate if you want, if you have access to low field.
Do you want to do?
Thanks so much.
All right, thanks. Now we have Moreno. Nice to see you in this audience. So go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Alberto. Very nice
Hi.
talk.
Thanks.
Yeah, asking you a question. Do you see a change in about the nuclear polarization of this Valanil? Do you see a change in the profile? This means a change in the nuclear polarization during time and during your experiment. So you see a building up of the nuclear polarization, in other words, or a disappearing of this nuclear polarization?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. From these measurements that we carried out, it's just one measurement at 85 Kelvin, let's say, we didn't observe any clear evolution. So at different delays, we didn't observe any clear evolution. This might be related to the fact that the polarization is created at very short times, and then the T1 of the nucleus is very long, at least for the time scales that we are probing, and therefore there is not a clear evolution in our spectrum. But it might be something to consider. I think, especially if we will be able, because this spin system is very complicated. You have a quartet state plus hyperfine interaction. So you have so many different energy levels that it's very difficult to say something. Ideal would be to try either to simplify the system and try something with, for example, the copper, if you engineer the molecule properly, or to find a way to polarize the ground state. If you polarize the ground state, then you don't have a quartet state anymore. You have a spin 1/2 coupled with a spin 7/2, and in this case, it's going to be much easier to analyze the spectrum. Or an alternative can be maybe trying hyperfine techniques or something like this. We can discuss this when I will be back to Florence.
Yes, I will be very happy about that because it's very interesting system. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations again.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Are there any other questions from the audience? Doesn't look like there is any. So yeah, thanks again, Alberto, for your nice seminar, and thanks all the audience for this very interesting discussion and Q&A session. All right.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the nice discussion.
Sure. All right. All right. And thank you all, and bye. Have a nice day or evening,
Bye.
wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Bye.